It's been a long time that I've been working with the Archivio Storico, about 10 years or so. So I've done pretty extensive research in the archive there over the past 10 years, not just in relation to Puccini, but also to how the opera industry responded to new media technologies more broadly. So I was really excited when they asked me to be involved with this collaboration. That's a great question. There are a few things that make it special. On one part, it's the fact that we get to think about various kinds of artistic media, both opera, which is my specialty originally, and then to think about it in connection to the history of cinema and the history of sound recording, which we often experience opera today involved with some sort of recorded media, whether it's live stream or whether it's recordings. But this exhibit gives us the chance to look back in history and see how these various artistic media first engaged with each other over 100 years ago. And the other thing that makes it really special is the involvement of the Archivio Storico Ricordi, in that they were the biggest music publisher in the 19th and 20th centuries, particularly for Italian opera. And because of that, and because so many of their documents have survived, really there's no other archive in the world that has the kind of collection that can answer the sorts of questions that you might want to ask about how opera and cinema really engaged when they first encountered each other. Yeah, how opera and cinema fit together. It's a question people have been asking since Puccini's time. And in a sense, there is no correct answer. Everyone has been experimenting, and we still experiment today. There were no rules when Puccini was alive for this is what cinema should do with opera, or this is what opera should do with cinema. And we have the same kind of experimentation today. How we involve cinema in productions, or how we might stream various performances live from opera houses, recordings. So the fun part is there is no answer, and however you want it to be involved, you can make that happen. There have been a lot of questions since Puccini's time about what did he think about cinema, and was he interested in writing for films, or what did he think about films adapting his operas? And we also think a lot about how his music sometimes sounds like a film score. When you look at the history of Puccini, you realize that he was composing before cinema existed. He had composed Bohème, and it premiered before any sort of film was shown in Italy. And so when you describe La Bohème as cinematic, it's using the term that we are familiar with today to describe something like opera that might be less familiar to people. So to say, oh, you know how music works with an image and it can guide your ear just like a camera guides your eye. Well, with Puccini, that's what his music did, but it was before film was able to do that. And so in some ways, I think film and film music has taken a lot from Puccini and really followed in the kinds of artistic experimentation that Puccini did, and kind of took that and transformed it into a new medium. Film companies were really interested in Puccini's operas from the earliest years of cinema, in part because they were so popular on the stage. So film companies thought, ooh, if this is popular on the stage, why don't we capture it and move it to the screen as well? In addition, when cinema was first a thing, people thought of it as a sort of technological curiosity, like, oh, isn't that interesting? That's this new quirk. Let's go see this new strange thing. And it wasn't seen as a really artistic medium in the same way that we might think about it today. So film companies thought, ooh, if we want to be seen as particularly artistic, why don't we capture operas on cinema? So the first Puccini-related films, it's tricky to date because in part, we don't have all of the films surviving. And so if there, for example, is a film entitled Tosca, we might not know if it was specifically related to Puccini's opera or to the play that inspired it without having the film itself surviving. But what we can speculate is that people were so familiar with Puccini's operas that if they saw, ooh, there's this film named Tosca, they're going to think of it in connection with Puccini. And maybe the movie theaters that were going to screen that film thought, well, if we need music, why don't we use some of Puccini's music? So to answer the question, 1908 is probably the earliest that I found. There was Italafilm's Manon Lescaut from that year. There was Nordisk Film's La Tosca, and then also Film d'Arte La Tosca as well, which we have a surviving excerpt for that's included in the exhibition. Audiences were really interested in them. So it moved from seeing film as this quasi-mechanical curiosity that people were interested in going to see, but then saying, oh, now this new technology, we can see some of the most famous operas on screen. And eventually, by the 19-teens, maybe some of the most famous opera singers as well, and perhaps there will be a live recording, a live performance, or there will be a recording accompanying it, so we could see and hear the opera together. So it really excited people, the opportunity to see both this new technology and new operas or old favorite operas. What opera could offer cinema is something that people talk about a lot. That opera has artistry, it has music, it has ways of communicating imaginative or deeply human experiences to the world. But it's less common that scholars have thought about what did cinema mean for opera. And yet, I think we think about that today more frequently. The idea that, oh, we can hear this recording of Maria Callas singing Tosca, or we can hear the latest recording from some of today's opera stars featuring some of these key roles that are really important for their careers and of which they're great interpreters. So really, technology has been doing this for opera not just today and not just with cinema, but since the 19th century. If you think about, for example, printed scores, if you didn't have sound recording and you wanted to hear an excerpt from your favorite opera, you'd have to go to the opera theater unless you had a score and you could maybe perform that at home. And so printed scores were a new medium and a new technology in the 19th century as they were able to be mass produced that could bring opera outside of the opera house. And then with sound recording, you had the ability to hear something not just once, but over and over again. And with film, there were many opera houses in Italy, but still, perhaps if you were in the middle of nowhere, you'd have a hard time seeing a great production like you could at La Scala, for example. And so there was this idea that film could bring really great productions and really famous singers and make them accessible to people that maybe didn't have the opportunity to go and see that level of production. There were a couple of implications that come to mind. One would be as the industry shifted away from silent cinema, which of course was almost always accompanied, it meant that all of the film scores that Ricordi had produced were not going to be used anymore because musicians would not be performing live alongside of films. Instead, you would now have recordings that would be made and then synchronized electronically with the moving image. So what Ricordi needed to produce changed. Second is we experience the issue of when something isn't synchronized if your internet is a little wonky and the sound and the image are slightly off and it drives us nuts. Because of that reason, before the sound period, you would not have had your character on screen saying words that then you're also hearing sung because they would be slightly off. So when you had sound film, that meant new possibilities for what could be captured on the screen, is that you could have a character saying the words that you want to hear sung. And then third is Ricordi realized now that films are going to be accompanied by sound, almost every film is going to need music. We have music and the film companies don't. So perhaps we can have a beneficial collaboration where we provide the music that they need. Yes, I think so much of the history of Casa Ricordi, as we showcase in this exhibition, is how Ricordi was seeing possibilities in the future and looking to see how it might benefit not just them as publishers, but benefit their composers and benefit the world of opera. How can opera be brought more effectively to more people, and how can it impact their lives in a positive way?